I think a lot of the folks that watch this channel are experiencing a similar situation to what we are, which is that it is quite cold. It's actually been a very real January, pretty solidly, deeply cold for a lot of it. And last night in particular was the coldest night that we've had in, I think, 3 years or so, something like that. Certainly it's been a lot colder, and I'm sure there's lots of places much colder than we are experiencing. But it's a real winter, and one of the things I wanted to talk about in this video today is the specific reality of rabbits in the winter. So hopefully that's compelling. Let's get into it. I should be clear that when I say rabbits in the winter, I don't mean raising rabbits in the winter. I mean managing or understanding or having relationship to wild rabbits in the winter. So as an example, in our garden here, you can see some rabbit tracks from a few nights ago, and the rabbit having a nice interaction with this Nanking cherry, which is a nursery plant, pretty high value to us and not really ideal to get cut to ground during the winter. Could definitely be a video about, okay, you got rabbits as a problem, how do we deal with these nuisance pests and vermin and blah blah blah. That's all fine and good. You could find those videos everywhere on YouTube and elsewhere if that's what you're looking for. This is a permaculture channel, so my interest is how do we integrate rather than segregate, or how do we value the marginal? How do we support the reality that rabbits exist in the winter? They exist and they're here too. Not have them eat our nursery stock. I don't want to just be utterly passive. Go ahead, rabbits, eat everything that's here. You can enjoy it all. We'll start from scratch again. As a nursery, these plants are critical for our income. But there are ways, I think, to both exclude rabbits physically. That's a real thing, and I'll touch on that briefly. But satisfy their needs, their desire and their explicit needs for survival by offsetting where they are. So like right now, this is a hard space for them to get into our garden, but they're willing to do it because there are a lot of things like beautiful little Nanking cherries that are small diameter first year and really delicious and ready to go, and seedling peaches that can get absolutely demolished by rabbit interaction. You can see that one there, chewed down to a few inches. It's not dead, it'll grow again, but it certainly is not a plant we'd be able to sell. They didn't get all these peaches in here, but if we leave things completely untended here and just wonder what happens, I know what happens. I've experienced it enough. We would lose these by the end of the winter. So we can see some pretty strong desire lines of how they move through here. And with the snow going on and things like that, we can very much clearly see what their tracks are. We can see how they move through the space, and that's one way to deal with them physically. So we did put chicken wire around the boundary of this fence, and for the most part that keeps them out, but once in a while they're able to sneak in and wreak some havoc. They come in through that bottom over there. If I add bricks and things, that'll stop them. But what does it look like to actually address their needs before they get to the garden? Rabbits eat a wide variety of plant material. In the summer, it seems like they enjoy leafy greens and things like that. And in the winter months, they seem to go a little bit stronger on young, woody stems. Apple, cherry, peach, plum, that kind of stuff is super compelling to them and happens to be what we grow. So how can we offer that to them without destroying our own plants? I'm out of the garden now. I just went through the fence. This is to the south of our neighbor's spot, out by our little homemade solar array, which I talked about before, but I digress. You can see here where the rabbit activity gets really strong. So the physical fencing of our garden does a lot to reduce the total amount of rabbit traffic that gets in, because this would be what it looks like inside there if they had full access to it. You can see the borderline highway through here. There's little poops all throughout. There are some other creatures moving through here. I think we've seen a bit of a dog type track. I've seen a couple deer moving through here, but predominantly this is intensely rabbit. In fact, you can see some rabbit poops, and there's a solution here, maybe not a solution that's surefire and final, but very effective in saying, hey, rabbits exist. They have needs to survive the winter. How do we offer things to them and also have the fertility that they offer up be an exchange for that? I keep following here to the west on the north end of our pond and beyond, and can see a very dominant track pattern. There's a few different paths that are happening here. One is going in that direction, back to a hedgerow, which we'll look at in a moment, and the other is going in this corridor which splits the space between the edge of our property and our neighbors. And these sort of corridors, these sort of edge spaces tend to be where rabbits both move and live. Something we could consider doing is recognizing that these brush piles, which we leverage extensively for managing material that needs to get pruned back, so willow and things like that, we lay them up. This does a very nice job of keeping deer reduced and being able to move through here easily, but certainly entirely rabbit porous, if not really rabbit affirming. Here's some good news. We've got all these willows that we planted here on the north side of our pond that were just simply cutting stuck in the ground, and they rooted beautifully and they started growing. Every few years it's very worthwhile cutting them flush to ground, and rabbits eat that material. This is for demonstration purposes only, because normally I'd like to cut them flush to ground so the regrowth is a lot fresher and healthier for the plant. But for the demonstration purposes, I could take this growing stem that has lots and lots of tip wood. It's this fine material that the rabbits prefer, really small diameter, sub-pencil diameter first-year wood, which they can only access on young plants. And I could say, well, here you go, you got to the fence, rather than pushing your way in, here's some food right here. And that's kind of like level 1 addressing rabbit pressure and trying to distract them, but we can do better than that. Here's an autumn olive in the landscape that makes particularly massive, absolutely delicious fruits. And it turns out autumn olive young growth is really compelling to rabbits, and autumn olive happens to be a very assertive growing plant. And so here's a branch that's crossing a pathway. Ultimately, what I'll do when I'm actually wearing gloves and focused on work is go through with a handsaw and cut it so that the pathway is really, really opened up and we don't have these things sticking out. But this sort of wood, of an autumn olive, of a peach, of an apple, what have you, that needs to be pruned anyway, tons and tons of material in here that the rabbits would love to eat. Here is a patch of sochan, which is a nutrient-hungry, beautiful perennial vegetable that we offer on our website. It is an herbaceous perennial, so it's completely below the snow. Nothing of value, so to speak, is above the snow that could be hurt by rabbits. I put that autumn olive branch on there, and I add willow, I add apple, etc. directly over this patch of sochan. The rabbits can eat all they want on here and poop on the snow. When the snow melts, it settles that nutrient in and feeds the plants below. Their dark poop sitting on the snow actually help it thaw out and melt a little bit sooner in the spring too. You can start doing some interesting design where we're saying, okay, there is woody plant material management that needs to be done in the winter months. I want to go through and prune my apple orchard. I want to prune back these old pears, renovate some peaches, etc. I have rabbit pressure. They're forcing their way into a place it's hard for them to get to eat small amounts of things that are precious to me. What if I take the prunings that I have to do anyway and lay that material where I'd like to see fertility be generated? Here's an interesting example where before the snow came and things got very, very cold, I took some branches of that particular autumn olive that has such great flavor, and I stuck those cuttings in the ground over here. 1, 2, 3, nitrogen fixing, fruit bearing boundary plants. And you can see that the stems that are very high up, taller than 2 feet, are left alone entirely, but the stems that are down near the ground have been completely wailed on by the rabbits. So here's a great example for those of you that have autumn olive in your landscape and you hate it. That's fine. What does it look like to cut those branches and lay them where you want to see fertility being built and you know that rabbits might be around? All of those poops are going to feed the soil. In our case, it's going to feed the autumn olives that root here. That's fine. Or they won't root, and that's fine. But I could also be cutting them and laying them over a garden bed that I might grow onions in the spring, for example. Hopefully you're not getting too hung up on me mentioning autumn olive in a non-hateful way. I'm just talking about plants, and I like to have interactions with all of the different plants in as many different ways as possible. This one showed up. It's workable. We can maintain it where it is. We can maintain it by harvesting the fruit. And like I'm demonstrating here, it has things that are valuable and useful to us, but also material that can feed the wildlife while we do the management and the reduction of the plant area of that plant. But you can do it with any non-native plant, including apples and peaches and things like that. In fact, here's another non-native plant that a lot of people actually love, which is wonderful too, and this is the apple. This is a seedling from a nice quality fruit that we were eating, that we dropped on the ground and pushed in, and a couple came up. we'll have to thin down to one plant at some point. You can see in here where the rabbits are starting to chew on them a little. That's not too big a deal. I'm not too worried about it, although I don't want them to eat all of the bark. And so what I might do is say, okay, in this set of 3 main branches, I know we're going to not want this one in the middle. We want a little bit more space. I'll do a nicer clean cut down low in the spring when we're past danger of really damaging freezes. And instead of the rabbits having to go up the stem and pick at something that we don't really want them eating, I'll just offer them this really delicious branch on the ground. It's easier, literally lower hanging fruit, lower hanging stem. They can eat all of that, and then we can renew by pruning some more material once they've exhausted this and they've deposited their poop to feed the apple. You can see an immense amount of rabbit activity in this area because, if I remember correctly, we had parsley and chard growing here during the growing season, and then the snows came and the freezes came and the rabbits remembered where they were and they kind of worked the snow away to get access. I'm fine with that. The plants may rebound or not. They're annuals, so I'm not too concerned if they've killed them. But it's a neat thing to be able to leave extra greens for wildlife to eat, and they'll give you fertility in exchange. In this area, which is our chicken summer run, there's an easy spot for the rabbits to get under the fence. I'm not going to put effort into trying to repair this whole fence line because most of the plants in here are nice and big. There's willow and elderberry and currants. But what I could do is say willow being a nice plant to feed rabbits, and these willows being quite big, it's an opportunity to do more chop and drop, feed the rabbits where we want the deposit of their fertility. Let's look at one example. Ridiculous amount of activity in here. So rabbits are coming very often, and some things to observe. There's magic in, at least to me it feels pretty magical, the currants. So right in here is a white currant, there's another white currant. Elderberries do not seem, and currants do not seem to be browsed by rabbits at all. I'm interested to hear if you've had different experience, please share. But we can plant elder and currants anywhere that rabbits are intense and not worry about losses. These white currants are growing quite slowly in here, and I think they could use more fertility. So I might come into this section where we've got a gumi that is a cousin to autumn olive, but a little bit better behaved and really big, beautiful fruit in the summer, which also does not seem to get browsed by rabbits much at all. This gumi is starting to lose the amount of light it would like, in part because some of these willows are growing too big around it. And so, let me take my pruners and, again, pretty haggard snip because I'm filming right now and my hands are freezing. I would do it a little bit cleaner and lower. Lots and lots of feeding material for the rabbits right here. Let's say to the rabbits, we welcome you, and let's have you eat here in this row of white currants. Maybe we'll get a bunch of fertility here and take another cutting from one of these white currants and plant it right into a nice pile of poop in the spring. Because the currants and the elderberries don't get any browse, we can leverage the willow, the apple, the peach, the pear, the plum, all the characters that the rabbits really love with the pruning we're going to do anyway, and feed them in the same line. The light's starting to fade, and my gosh, trying to film and touch metal pruners in the winter like this at the same time. A cold camera and a cold pair of pruners and bare hands, not the easiest. But you get the idea. Wherever you are you interacting? Is there a possibility to interact with nature in a way that is a little bit easier and less stressful, a little bit more generous and actually really productive, but still meeting your needs? So I'm not saying let the rabbits eat every plant everywhere, but more like, what are the plants that the rabbits don't seem to mess with? Can we fertilize those with plants that they do, with pruning that we want to do anyway? Can we encourage them to not push their way through a fence line and stay out in the wild? Can we provide pruning from our orchards and offer it to them where they live? It's a shorter commute, and boy, when it's -8 Fahrenheit out, a rabbit would much prefer to eat from stems that are miraculously laid 10 feet from their home than have to haul across an open field and under a fence and be stuck and all that kind of stuff. So there's opportunities here to have a little bit more grace and gentleness in how we relate to these creatures. Rabbits are tough. They can be very damaging. They can erase a lot of value from our nursery very quickly, but I don't hate them. They exist in this landscape and they definitely deserve to. And it's cold, and if you're just living with the fur on your body, you deserve some nice food. So anyway, permaculture lens on dealing with rabbits Thought that would be compelling to folks. Share notes down below. If you had different experiences, do you think I'm way off? Very open to hearing it. Thank you. Take care.